In the wake of the resignation of Hockey Canada's CEO and board of directors today, I was wondering if you could say what, in your opinion, does Hockey Canada need to do to regain your trust and that of Canadians?
Well, I think seeing the entire board and the CEO step down is an important step forward, but there's a culture to change. There is an awful lot of work to ensure that the structures and systems that Hockey Canada has in place protects employees, protects Canadians, protects our kids as they play hockey. There's work to do to transform the culture at Hockey Canada, but today was an important first step.
There you go. That's the Prime Minister weighing in on the announcement that came earlier this afternoon that, in fact, the chairman, he's Scott Smith, he's gone, and so is the entire board of directors. They're basically going to start from scratch. Part of their statement today says, recognizing the urgent need for new leadership and perspectives, the entire board of directors announced it will step aside. And pursuant to Hockey Canada's bylaws, the board will ask its members to select a new slate of directors by no later than the forthcoming virtual election, December 17th, 2022, and then adds the board will not seek re-election, but will fulfill its fiduciary duties until such time as a new board is elected. Hockey Canada is seeking board candidates to shape the future of the organization. We encourage qualified individuals to respond to the call for nominations issued by the independent nominating committee last week. You know, we talked earlier about this, and basically I think we can all agree it took Hockey Canada probably too long to get this done. They were shamed into it.
Way too long.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
So where do we go from here? Scott Stinson is a national sports columnist for the National Post. He's on the line. Scott, thanks for the time this afternoon. I guess we can say right off the bat this was not a surprise, or maybe it was a surprise in the fact that it took this long to get here.
Yeah, I mean, look, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, we were all sort of saying, well, surely there's going to be some resignations. The only real way forward is for the people who were in charge at the time that most of the controversy happened need to move on, and then you bring in new leadership and the sponsors could come back and make everyone kind of feel like we were turning the page and starting anew and all those cliches. But for reasons really only known to Hockey Canada, they refused to do that for quite some time, right up into including Andrea Skinner, the former board chair's appearance before a parliamentary committee last week, where she basically went on the offense and blamed other people for some of the criticisms and saying that some of the problems that had taken root at Hockey Canada were broader societal problems. And so it was, I think, quite surprising to see that turn last week. Less surprising to see all the sponsors respond to that by saying, okay, well, then we're pulling our sponsorship if that's the way you think about things. And then once that happened, really not surprising at all that you had the resignations that happened today, because that seemed like really the only way forward now.
In your latest piece in the National Post, Scott, I feel like you just really nail it with the question you ask, which is change finally comes to Hockey Canada, but how much will it come to hockey? That's the fundamental problem here. Will the change that needs to happen really happen?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, Natasha, is when this story first broke in the spring through reporting from TSN's Request Head, we ended up sort of going from the initial shock of the sexual assault allegations and the lawsuit that was quickly settled to talking about broader questions about hockey culture and the way young hockey players are treated in this country, and do we put too much on them at too young an age? Do they become too successful and we give them too much outsized importance that they don't know how to behave themselves in normal society, and so on and so forth? Are there problems with the way junior hockey is managed? You know, all these different questions that were sort of asked, and then summer went by and hockey season is here again, and really none of those things, from what I can tell, have really been addressed or even asked about. And what we now have is we have new leadership in Hockey Canada, and maybe that will be the thing that is needed to sort of get those other questions asked and addressed. But the structural stuff obviously is not something you can solve overnight, but it does feel like you kind of needed this step to take place before the other stuff can begin to be addressed.
So if we look down the road here, new board of directors, and I'm assuming, and I think it's in the press release as well, there'll be representation from various Hockey Canada groups across the Hockey Quebec, Hockey Nova Scotia, et cetera.
Right.
Is that enough Because obviously they know what's gone on. We already heard from a couple of those organizations they will not be supporting Hockey Canada. But given we have a clean slate here, is that enough to change, do you think, the culture that was Hockey Canada?
I think the big question with, the reason that people like myself were saying you need to have resignations at the top previously was that there was always a suspicion that unless you brought in truly outside people to kind of take a fresh look at it and go, wait a minute, why do we do this way? Is this the best way to be running this program or that training, department and so on and so forth? That you would just get people who are kind of entrenched with the status quo, and there might be new bodies put in place, but really the same people that had been quite content with the way Hockey Canada had been doing things for the past number of years. So bringing in real outsiders, people who might look at everything from the way they run their finances to the way they've dealt with injury complaints and assault complaints and various other things, having somebody with a totally new outlook on these things might be just the thing that is needed to have them act differently in the future. We obviously won't know until they do it. But I do think casting a wider net than just the people who've been at Hockey Canada previously is an important first step.
I feel like it could take generations to really change the toxic culture. Yeah, I don't. You tell me. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. It probably would not surprise you to learn that in writing about this over the past months, every time you write about it, you hear from people who say, well, I don't see what the big deal is. This isn't Hockey Canada's problem. They shouldn't be responsible for what boys do, in their own private lives. And who amongst us hasn't had an experience like this where they go out and have a few drinks and then they have regrets the next day? These kind of questions, these kind of statements come up and they speak to a broader problem. And, it's interesting that Hockey Canada at various points in the past couple of months has sort of said things like, we realize that there's a major issue with the culture in the sport and we need to do things to address it. And then at the same time kind of said, let's not go too far and suggest it's the only problem or something like that. So I think it will take generations. I think you will have to have younger people who kind of grow up knowing that some of the things we think of that are associated with hockey culture are not acceptable will eventually kind of age their way out of the organized sport, and especially the higher reaches of it.
I'm a lot more hopeful than you, apparently, or Natasha are. And I'm thinking to myself, with all the publicity and everything we found out over the past, say 6 months, that mentality is already beginning to change. I think that message is getting through at every level of the sport. So I'm imagining, maybe in a couple of years, maybe not even, people realize, if they don't already, what's right, what's wrong, and be able to draw a line somewhere. So we're very far apart.
I hope you're right. Look,
I hope I'm right too.
Certainly, you're absolutely right. There's been a lot of attention to it. I just do wonder how many people, one of the reasons that these resignations took so long could well be that they ultimately felt like they didn't really do anything wrong, and that this story was, a media construct, and it was getting blown out of proportion. And why were we making such a big deal out of it all these months later? I do think there's a possibility that some of that explains why it took so long for these decisions that were taken to happen. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that is fair. Hey, Scott, I want to thank you so much for weighing in on this today. Appreciate your time.
Okay, my pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Scott Stinson, sports columnist for the National Post. There's going to be a lot of follow-up from this, I'm sure, over the next couple of days, and it'll be very interesting to see what the makeup is going to be of the new board of directors. This is so tricky. It's so tricky because there's a toxic culture that exists within Hockey Canada, amongst the players, but we all also idolize those players, right? And it starts at a very young age. And there is a culture of entitlement and that you're somehow above it all, and that boys will be boys. What I will say, so I will say that's where you can have some hope is that doesn't fly with women anymore. And it also doesn't fly with a lot of younger, like the next generation of men. They know better, and so they do better. I will nominate the next chair for Hockey Canada. Mm-hmm. I believe it should be Ronna Ambrose. Interesting choice. Just saying. That is my choice, my suggestion for the chair of Hockey Canada. Interesting choice. So we'll see.